Good morning, church. Like they said, my name's Riley, and welcome everybody. I hope everyone's been enjoying a beautiful weekend so far. It was gorgeous yesterday for those 3 hours that it wasn't raining and storming, but it hit 70, and I'm very excited for that. I'm super pumped for spring. I want it to be warm out. I think I know, it's not the heat, I think, that reminds me that like spring is on its way. I think it's more like the insects trying to get in my house, because yesterday I saw a fly trying to get in on my window, and they have awoken. So I know that spring is coming up quickly. But this morning, if you guys want to be turning over to Luke, actually, it's like, we're not going to Luke, we're going to go to Mark today. Mark chapter 9. And the reason is that we're going to look at the same story in Luke 9, verses 37 to 45, which is the story of the son who has a demon-possessed son, or the man who has a demon-possessed son. It's in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But we're going to be reading from the Mark version this morning, because there's a few things in there, a few details that we kind of want to go into. But the title for today's lesson is Unstuck Faith. And as you guys are flipping there, I'm going to go ahead and go to God and pray. Dear Heavenly Father, God, thank you for this morning that we can come and worship you and sing songs. And God, I thank you for being a good Father, one that does not focus on our results and things like that loves us, Lord, for how you created us. Lord, that we can know that, Lord, on Sabbath and on days that we're not doing anything, that, God, we are good because you made us that way. Thank you for being a Father like that. I pray as we go into your word, you show us exactly what you want us to see so that we can walk out of here feeling more faithful, able to see, God, what you're able to do in our lives. God, we love you. We ask all this in your son's name. Amen. And as you guys are getting there, we're going to be Mark 9, verse 16. And give a little background. This is right after the disciples are coming off the mountain of transfiguration, this huge moment for them. You can imagine Peter, James, and John are going to talk about that for like ever. This is like the ultimate men's retreat. The very first men's retreat, maybe. So they're probably coming off of a high, feeling pretty good. And they get down to the base of the mountain, and pretty quickly they're met by a crowd that's down there. And there seems to be trouble. And in Mark 9, verse 16, I'll begin reading. They get to the base. "What are you arguing about?" he asked. And this is Jesus. A man in the crowd answered, "Teacher, I brought you my son who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of his speech. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him into the ground. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not." "You unbelieving generation," Jesus said, "how long will I stay with you? How long will I put up with you? Bring the boy to me." So they brought him. And when the spirit saw Jesus, it immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground, rolled around, foamed at the mouth. And Jesus asked the boy's father, "How long has he been like this?" "From childhood," he answered. "It has often thrown him into fire or water to kill him. But if you can do anything, please take pity on us and help us." "If you can," said Jesus, "everything is possible for the one who believes." And immediately the boy's father exclaimed, "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief." So let's stop there. And this is one of my favorite stories. I feel like I can relate to the man very well in this story. I think pointing out one thing, this guy, this character that's coming, I think obviously he possesses some level of faith. That there is something here that he sees in Jesus, that he knows that possibly there's a fix for my son, that maybe if I bring him, he can do something with him. And he hears about Jesus. He travels all the way there. He meets the diet disciples who can't do anything. And eventually Jesus comes down. And I love this because, the guy eventually is questioned by Jesus, and they kind of get into a conversation. And it comes out from the man, "I do believe, but help me in my unbelief." And I love that because it's so honest. I feel like for many of us and many people, we go back and forth. We can kind of teeter like, we believe. Jesus, I see what you can do. I've seen you do amazing things. I've heard amazing stories. But help me in my unbelief. I love that. I feel like I can relate to that a lot. But I want us to imagine ourselves in this scene. Like, put yourself in the story. Like, this was a real event. Like, this literally happened. Imagine being there. These are real people. And the father brings his boy to Jesus. And then, just picture you're there in the crowd just watching, and the boy just goes into a convulsion. He just starts to shake. He falls into the ground. He's foaming at the mouth. I can imagine, like, if that happened here, it's like everybody would immediately jump into attention. Like, somebody would call 911. Somebody would get down to see how he is. So we'd ask, hey, is there somebody here who has medical experience? Like, we would immediately jump into action. And I think it's very interesting how Jesus approaches this scenario. So imagine, he's there, he's on the ground. The father is probably freaking out, probably for more than one reason, because, he's bringing him to Jesus, probably his last kind of hope, and it just gets worse. Like, it just immediately gets worse. And then you can imagine the father's hopelessness. It's like, oh my goodness, like, there's nobody else. Where am I going to go? So imagine that's all happening. And then Jesus is there, and he looks over to the father, and he goes, how long has this been happening? I think that's crazy. It's like when you imagine somebody just to jump in and do something, Jesus stands there, and he starts just to talk to the father. He begins a conversation with him. If I was the father, I'd probably be pretty tempted to be like, Jesus, can we debrief later? Can we talk about this afterward? Can you help my son? Why does Jesus do that? Now, the truth is, Jesus does that because he cannot work in the absence of faith. That there is something here with the man, that there is a wrestling, that there is something that Jesus wants to bring out, that he wants to help him to understand. Jesus focuses foremost first here on the man's faith. And I think there's a beautiful thing here with that. Jesus, he doesn't just turn the man away. He doesn't look to him and say, hey, you don't have faith? Get out of here. Go get some faith, then come back. No. Jesus begins to ask him questions. But he cannot work until this guy has kind of gotten to the root of the problem here. Because it's not just the son. It's his faith and his belief. Can Jesus actually do something here? Can he work in this situation? And I think over time, as obstacles and setbacks, personal shortcomings, all that kind of stuff, it can lead us to places where we feel, I think we can have an intellectual faith. Like we kind of like have it in our head, we believe, we know intellectually God can do something. But I think that we can begin to not believe in our heart. That at the deepest level, that God truly can move in this situation. I do believe, he says, help me in my unbelief. And I want to walk through here, kind of how it kind of goes. Here's what Jesus does. He says, bring the boy to me. And I love Jesus here. Jesus, he steps out front. He says, bring the boy here. He wants them to bring the problem, to bring him before his feet. Then he begins to ask questions of the man. He draws the man's heart out. He talks to him and begins to kind of help him get to the point where the man sees, like, okay, there is a lack of faith here, that, okay, maybe this does need to be addressed. And it does end, Jesus then, he could have just, snapped the finger, the demon could have been gone. Why does Jesus ask a question here? I think it's very interesting because he could have said, done, demon's gone, it's never coming back. Or he knows also like how long the boy's been struggling with this. It's not like he doesn't know. But he chooses to wait and to ask questions, to help the man wrestle through in his heart where he is. And then Jesus heals. And we've read the story before, and after the man confesses his struggle, he talks about it, the lack of faith. Jesus works. Jesus works in an incredible way, a very visual way for this man. And what does this show us? I think one big point that we can draw from this is God is okay with wrestling. That we are allowed as people to have doubt. I think that's very, we can all relate to that in some way. And I always think of the Old Testament. If you guys remember Jacob, there's a great story to go back and read where Jacob has a moment with God where he wrestles with him. And that's the moment where God kind of gives him his new name, which is Israel, and one who wrestles with God. That's what the word Israel actually means. And I think at its very root, this is part of our faith that God's very okay with. He wants us to wrestle through. He wants us to ask good questions about why we see that maybe he cannot work here. I think it's a very natural thing. But the truth is, Jesus doesn't want us to stay there. He wants us to ask the questions and to think critically about it. Now, verse 28, let's keep going. After Jesus had gone indoors, and this is after he heals the boy's son, and an amazing victory, amazing miracle happens. They go indoors, and the disciples ask him in private, Why couldn't we drive them out? And he replied, this kind only come out by prayer. So stop there. Jesus, he wants us to bring these things to him. The doubts, the things that we don't see that he can work in, things that are difficult. He wants us to talk about these things with him. Lay them before his feet so he can increase our faith. The man's response, if you can, if you can help, maybe help Jesus. What he's teaching us here is that, no, he wants us to wrestle through these things and actually think about them. Everything is possible for the one who believes, is the response he gives to the man. Transformation of our families, our friends, because we all want to see change. We all want to see Jesus move in a great way in our life. All those things happen when we first begin with our faith, with our individual belief. If faith is not addressed first, like Jesus does here, nothing else really matters. Even big wondrous events, like Jesus could have healed him right then and there. And Jesus does a lot of healing, but also Jesus does a lot of, a lot of scenarios where he doesn't heal. He chooses not to heal in scenarios. Big, awesome victories can happen. But if we don't actually dig where we don't really see God moving and actually ask ourselves these big questions, faith cannot grow. But faith, and a growing faith, and this is why Jesus focuses on it, has lasting effect, eternal effect. A few years ago, me and some friends, we went down to a place called Red River Gorge. We went camping. We loved camping all through college. And one of my favorite parts about camping is the fire. I like the fire. I like building the fire. I like watching it. I think also that fire is it's an amazing illustration for what faith is. If there was anything that was tangible and we could see it in our world, faith is a great way to teach, or fire is a great way to teach what faith is. It's very beautiful. You could stare at a campfire for hours, or at least I could. I think it's very lovely. But it's also very powerful. It has the ability to level cities and forests and all these things. And faith is like that. It can be beautiful, but also it has great power. Now, when we went on this camping trip, we got there and, we were college students, we did not look at the weather before we got there. And this is the year before I moved out here, so I was 22, something like that. We didn't look at the weather, we're driving in, and it's just pouring down rain. And we're already down there. We're 2 hours into Kentucky. We're not turning back. We got to go down. So we get there, and finally the rain does stop, and it's 9 o'clock. It's dark outside. So we get out, and we start setting up camp and stuff. And okay, we need a fire now. We need to build something. And I don't know if you've ever tried building a fire with wet wood. It's really, really difficult. It's a very hard scenario. We're but we have to. we need fire. We're gonna get freezing tonight. So we begin walking around. We begin picking up the sticks that we can find, the things that look like the most dry that we could do, and we begin to gather and kind of do the work. And my one buddy would be back at the campsite. He's stripping off the bark, trying to get it dry, and we're going to work trying to get this to happen. And as we're going, we start building a fire, and you kind of have to baby this thing, or we did anyway. We had to fan it. We had to give it as much oxygen as possible. We had to choose very specifically which branches to use, all these kinds of things. And there was a lot of work kind of went in, but eventually we got it going. It took us probably an hour with all of our paper plates, just around the fire, just fanning it, until finally it got really, really small. And we put little small branches on it, little small branches. We loved it, and it got bigger, and eventually we had warmth that night, which was good. And I think faith is kind of like that. It takes work, and it has to be fed, and it has to be fanned. You got to kind of put that in, especially in areas where we lack it. Wet wood, something that's difficult to get going. It took a lot of more work, a lot more thought, and time sitting down with it. And that's what can be like to fan our faith, especially in areas where we don't see God working. We don't know if God can work there. Where we lack the faith, it just takes extra fanning, and it takes extra feeding. That's how you get a faith unstuck. So what does this exactly look like? It starts with our times with God. In the times where people aren't watching us, but no one else sees, are times where we sit with God in His Word, and we talk to Him through prayer. When we lay these things before His feet. If you know me, you know that I'm in my personal life. I'm working on many things. One of them is just my character of integrity, trying to be a man of my word and things like that. And if you know me, I could be late places a lot, and I have to think very critically about like when I need to leave and things like that. And integrity is a big area of my life that after my baptism, Jesus didn't say just okay, you're going to be a man of integrity. No, I've had to work very hard on it. And so what it looks like for me to grow and to fan, or on a lot of weeks, I can kind of go by and even this past week, I can think of several scenarios where I miscommunicated, or I didn't send out text in time, or something like that. And it'd be very easy for me to kind of get into despair, like, am I ever going to get over this? Am I ever going to grow here? Is this ever going to happen? And I have to think very critically about that. I have to really ask God, like, why am I going through all this trouble if I'm not seeing anything? And what it takes is I have to find scriptures that help. I have to go to the ones that specifically are going to help me grow. I like thinking about people who are trustworthy with little things are going to be trustworthy with many things. The more I think and focus and pray through that, I see that, there's a reason that I'm growing in these things. Because God, obviously, one day I might have more responsibilities. There might be more that God has in store, that he's preparing me for these moments. And I think that's why God lets us sit in these kind of things where we don't exactly see where he's going to move or why he's moving slowly, because he's building faith in us. He wants us to think about them, think critically. Our individual faith that nobody sees can be the most important part. Times with God and times in the Word. Now, I think for anyone who's a younger disciple, ask yourself, where in your faith do you feel like you're weak? That God is calling you to grow, that you're not sure, can he work there or can he actually use me here? What is that for you? If you're an older disciple, maybe there's a circumstance in your life that hasn't seemed to change, that seems to persist and go on, and God has not moved in the way that maybe you've envisioned it. Is there anything in your faith that God's calling you to grow and to step out? And okay, what's he trying to teach you through all that? Do you ask yourself what he's teaching you? If there's anyone who's visiting, who's maybe trying to figure these things out, who's unsure, I think first and foremost, know that God is seeking you before you're seeking him, that he's going through these steps. But also, what's it going to look like for you to build radical trust? Times with the Word and times praying to God. These moments that nobody sees can be the most integral ones. And kind of bringing in the lesson for a close, I think that this week can be an amazing opportunity for us to really see God do something great. Easter's coming up. It's a time of the year that people go to church. Everybody goes to church. It's one of those 2 times a year, Christmas and Easter. And I think that there's an amazing opportunity that people can see the body. People can come and get to see what a community focused on their individual faith can truly look like. I think it's a great opportunity, but I think one challenge this week that I do want to kind of extend people's way, ask yourself, what would be something faithful this week? What person, what circumstance would be a faithful move, and what is God trying to teach you there? What does God want you to do, and what scriptures and places does God want you to dig? Just like he's asked the man questions. So this week, challenge everybody to really think through what's going to be faithful. And how does God want you to fan that flame so that as you grow in your faith that you can actually meet it this week? But with that, that's all I got for you guys this morning. Worship can come back up for one more song.